Vadim Kaiser here, and today's topic is pizza. Why is it so tough to resist, even in its cold and slightly non-appealing form? I'll tell you why in a second. The answer really has to do with a fable. And this fable is about a frog, and it's also about a mouse. So there was a frog and there was a mouse. Not that kind. They were actually friends, really good friends, but they were ill-suited to be friends. They spent a lot of time together, and they decided they just wanted to spend all of their time together. So they tied themselves together. There's a problem with this. The problem is the mouse is really good on land, the frog is good on land and also water. One day they're playing, they're skipping rocks across the river, they're dancing, they're singing, they're having a great time. And the frog sees the glimmer on the water, and he's drawn to the water. He starts running faster and faster to get to the water, and he dives right in, and he's splashing, and he's croaking, and he's ribbiting, and all of a sudden he notices that the mouse washes up on the water, and he's dead. And before the frog has time to reflect, a falcon comes out of nowhere, spots the mouse, and grabs the mouse. And because they're attached, the frog gets dragged off along with his dead mouse friend. Strange story. These parables and fables always seem to have the frog as being someone that's maybe gullible and somewhat silly and lacking control. In this case, it was the frog's lack of self-control that really got him in trouble. This fable teaches us two things. The first is that self-control is necessary for human interaction. You want to cooperate, you have to figure out how to regulate your own desires. The frog can't regulate the desires he has for friendship and the desires he has for swimming in the water. Now, the second one is that there is this complex interaction between desires that occurs within the person or within the frog. This is why it's so difficult for us to resist things like cold pizza. Your experiment for this lecture is to try to think about pizza less than 2 times throughout the whole lecture. Here's the thing about desire. It's complex, and we sometimes want things, but we also want other people to want things. So there's this interview where they ask Eartha Kitt about love. Isn't love about compromise? Isn't it about sharing? And she says,
what is compromising? Compromising for what? Compromising for what reason?
At some point, the interviewer asks Eartha, is it just that other people are sharing your love for yourself? And she says something very peculiar.
Want someone to share me with me.
Wanting someone to share you with you has to do with the fragmentation of the human being's desires. How is it that we can have these multiple selves with multiple desires within one single person? Harry Frankfurt has a model for us. And this model consists of the different levels of desires which indicate the structure of the person's will. The interesting result is that not all human beings are persons, and maybe even some non-humans constitute persons. I think the perfect example of the non-human person is the cat. So if you've ever watched a cat watch you, you know that something really complex and also possibly dark and plotting and terrifying is going on within the cat's head. My cat used to position herself in front of a mirror at such an angle where she could watch me, but I couldn't see her. I think the complex, sneaky positioning indicates some sort of thought process where reflection is going on. Frankfurt's account depends on self-reflection. So what we're going to do next is analyze Frankfurt's model of personhood. Frankfurt's model of the person gives us a universal measure. That means it applies to any human, at any time, at any place, within any culture. So let's unpack this model. The first thing we have is first-order desires. Frankfurt is not concerned with just wants. He's concerned with effective wants. These are wants that motivate people towards action. These can also be really abstract things, like the desire for freedom or for peace, or, if you're a Zen Buddhist, the desire for no desire. And that one's a weird one, because to desire to get out of the karmic cycle, the cycle of suffering and death, you have to have some sort of motivation. But having motivation entails having desire. And you have to escape desire in order to escape the karmic cycle. But in order to want to escape the karmic cycle, you have to have desire in the first place. Let's hold off on that issue. According to Frankfurt, the set of first order desires constitutes our will. This is a little bit strange because usually we think of the will or the willpower as some active force that regulates desires. So we have the set of desires, the basic wants, and the amalgamation of these constitutes our will. So let's move up a layer. Second order desires are desires for desires. They are wants for wants. The important thing about second order desires is these are reflections on our first order desires. This is our self reflecting on the self, desiring what the self wants. So think about it as a complex evaluation of your will. Some people don't have a second order reflection on their will, and these are what Frankfurt calls wantons. These are people that just have first order desires. Now the question is, are wantons irrational? Are they animalistic in the sense that they just do things that they desire to do? The answer is no. Wantons can be rational. In fact, most of the time they are rational. So some of the time you decide to not eat the pizza, and other times it seems like a good idea. The wanton is constantly evaluating the things that he or she desires, but the wanton never reflects on the kind of person that he or she is. What does that mean? The wanton never reflects on his or her set of first order desires. The second order desire is slightly more complex. This is really the more tortured kind of person. The second order desire has a certain want on the first order level, but a conflicting want on the second order level. So let me give you an example. My favorite one is love. We get this deep motivation. We are drawn to people. We're not only drawn to people, but we are also drawn to a desire, love itself. We want to want love. And for some people, it's really easy. Some want to be in love, and they're completely comfortable with it. And if you ask them, do you have any doubts? No. They don't. Other people are love haters, and when presented with love, they get this aversive reaction. And when they reflect on this reaction, oh. But what if one of those people who didn't want love wanted to want love? Oh. In that case, they try out the lifestyle. Oh. But they realize something about themselves. Oh. They want to want love, but it can't move them to action. They want to want it, but they don't want to have it. So it's almost like a faint wish, a glimmer. It's something that you think is a nice thing that you entertain for just a second, but then you let go. This is why most people don't change. It's because they have these wishes, and while they might be strong at first, they fade, and we can't maintain them for some reason. These are second order desires. These are things that we want to want, but don't exactly want to have. They don't have enough motivation to drive us to action. So we just end up going back to our first order desires. In Frankfurt's case, this is like the unwilling drug addict, wanting the drug, but not wanting to want the drug. And this conflict creates a massive tension. But the result of the tension is that the drug addict relapses, goes back to the drug. So the question is the wanton a person? Is the second order desire a person? And the answer is no. The wanton's not a person because he doesn't reflect on his will. And the second order desire is on the cusp of personhood, but not quite there. He reflects on his will, but he can't match up his first order desires with his second order desires. And for that reason, he does not want the will that he has. The second order volitioner is someone that is very comfortable with his will, that chooses the will that he has. And in this case, let's refer back to our friend for a second. No. He loves tandem bicycle rides and sharing a baguette and all of that fuzzy, tingly stuff that's accompanied by the feelings of love. But he also reflects on this. Love is beautiful and virtuous and vulnerable and dangerous. These are all reflections on the value of the desire of love. And the second order volitioner has no tension between how he feels and how he reflects on how he feels. So we come to the necessary criteria for personhood. And the first condition is you reflect on your will. The second one is your first order desires are in line with your second order volitions. And what this means is you want the will that you already have. It's not possible for you to have a second order volition without having a first order effective desire. If you really want to want something, then your first order desire for that thing will be effective. What this means is it will motivate you towards action. The thing about Frankfurt's account is it fails to differentiate two types of agents that are both second order volitioners. The first one is the agent that likes the kind of person that he is, reflects on it, has no problem with it, has to put zero effort into it. So you can think about being born a hopeful romantic and having no problems at all with it, living your life exactly in this way with no doubts. These are people that reflect on their will, but it's not so hard for them to be this kind of person. The second kind of person that is a second order volitioner is Batman. Batman is somebody who took his will out of the abyss, dragged it out by the collar, and transformed it. There seems to be something that is very difficult in this process as compared to the first process where the person just likes the kind of will that they have. So when I see people like Lewis Gordon Poe who get into Arctic temperature waters and they have this process of transformation, if you hook up Lewis Gordon Poe right before he jumps into the water, his body temperature shoots up. This is something that he's consciously doing, even though he has these natural human first order desires where he's afraid of the cold. This is something that he transforms consciously. This is personhood in full effect. And Frankfurt fails to give us the distinction. It's important to remember that Frankfurt's model is almost like a scientific model. We can apply this empirically. You can take people and you can analyze these people based on the criteria of personhood. And sometimes the model fails. The final question I have is, do I have the freedom to decide if I'm a person or a non-person? Is this something that I choose, or is it just something that happens to me? And Frankfurt's answer is, free will is really just wanting to want our will. It's this line between first order desires and second order desires. But beyond that, humans don't have free will. Why? It's because the constitution of our wills is not up to us. It's up to deterministic or indeterministic causal processes, the building blocks of the universe. Whether you have Newtonian mechanics, special and general relativity, quantum mechanics, superstring theory, these all tell us that the universe is either deterministic or indeterministic. And it doesn't matter if we feel like we have free will. We feel like we are choosing our desires and also our desires about our desires. But we're not. The structure of your will is not something you have a choice about. You were either born a wanton, a second order desire, a second order volitioner, or beyond. In a way to show you that we have no control over the structure of our will, let alone the levels of desires that we have, is how many times did you think about pizza throughout this whole lecture? And was it really less than 2? A lot of times we seem to be a lot more ambitious about the structure of our personhood. And here's what I want you to do to demonstrate this. I want you to take a Myers-Briggs personality test. The goal is to analyze yourself, your personhood. But the difficulty is, sometimes you analyze yourself with a seemingly objective lens. But other times you're a little bit more ambitious than you should be. Other times you are just completely dishonest with yourself. So as you take this test and you're having an internal conversation with yourself about yourself, I want you to just enjoy sharing yourself with yourself. Just a quick recap, we started off with a pizza and then the complexity of human desires for other people, for themselves, for themselves with other people, then we transitioned into the structure of the person. We learned that wantons and second order desires are not people, even though they can be rational, and second order desires can reflect on their will. Next, we learned that the necessary conditions for personhood are: number one, reflection on your will; number two, the match between your first order desires and your second order desires. I realize I still have a fake mustache and a monocle on my hand. Finally, we learned what free will is. It is wanting the will that you already have. So enjoy your self-reflection, and I leave you with a tune for your journey. This is from my dear friend Brendan, and it's a cover of I Want You to Want Me, performed on a mandolin. I'll see you next time. It's perfect. That's awesome. Yeah, that's really, really good.